Happy Mother's Day and welcome to M1. When my dad was about 3, maybe 4 years old enough to talk, but not old enough to always enunciate his words well, he was playing with his truck in the mud. And because of the properties of mud, his truck got stuck. So he calls out to his older brother, my Uncle Jim, "Jim, help! I'm Tuck." And from there on, at least in his early years, he was called Tuck. But have you ever been stuck? Not in mud, but maybe in life. I found myself there in about 2017. I had stepped out of nursing, and even though Mark and I have always ministered side by side, I was now in the office a lot. And we were just kind of stuck knowing how to navigate that ministering side by side as opposed to kind of the little areas that we oversaw. And so I made a phone call because I needed to talk to somebody, and I couldn't talk to Mark because he was stuck with me. And so I needed to make a phone call to a friend who was co-pastoring with her husband about 90 minutes north of us in Kansas City. And I said, "Sandra, can I come up, take you to coffee, and just pick your brain a little bit? I want to ask you how you and Bob navigate that so very well." And you guys may even recognize Sandra. She was with us about 18 months ago and sat next to me as she was in town for some General Presbyter meetings. But at the end of my time with her, I walked away with some validation, with some clarity, knowing what my next step needed to be. I walked away with a full cup, not a coffee, I drained that. But I walked away with a full cup of validation. Have you ever been stuck? Stuck in life? Stuck in knowing how to parent a child or potty train that little boy who doesn't want to stop playing long enough to take care of business? Or maybe stuck not knowing how to navigate a new season of life? Or like me, stuck professionally? Imagine if somebody could help you get unstuck. That'd be quite the gift, wouldn't it? That could bring you clarity, validation, and your next step. If your cup was empty like mine was, and someone could fill it for you. Today I'm going to be speaking to 2 different age groups, both the younger and the older. And to the younger, I'm going to encourage you to find another mother. Now, don't replace the one you have, especially today. Honor her, okay? Honor her. But this is what I know as a mother. There are times when I would speak into my son's life and his ear wasn't tuned to my frequency. And I pray often, and he's 27 years old, and I still pray this because I don't get to be near him. God put people in his path, godly people in his path that would have his ear. So young women, find another mother. Find other people who are wise that will speak into your life. Now, like I said, speaking to both younger and older today, and if you're like, I'm not sure which camp I'm in. If you think you're the younger, you probably are. And if you think you're the older, you probably are. But this is something I learned even this past year. You can be in both camps at the same time. At 58 years old, I last year found myself in need of another mother, someone who I knew had gone through menopause and and I needed to pick her brain. How did you handle menopause and ministry at the same time? Because sometimes they don't coexist very well. And so I called a friend who was a little further down the road. So sometimes you can be both the older and the younger at the same time. But to the older ones, I want to encourage you, mother another. Would you be willing to mother another? Imagine if your struggles, your victories, your experiences not only had value when you went through them, but they still hold value today and can be valuable to another person. In a recent podcast between Carrie Nieuwhof and Christine Kane, Christine shared that Gen X women are leaving the church, in large numbers. And she says it's because they have lost their purpose and their connection. Something happens when we become empty nesters. We feel like our purpose is tied to our children, and our children don't need us at that same level anymore. Nothing could be farther from the truth. You can mother another here at M1. So even if you have never birthed a child, you too can mother another. And I realize that today can be an incredibly difficult day for some women. If infertility has touched your life as it has ours, today can be incredibly challenging. And yet, if you would be willing to share your wisdom and your experience and your insights that you have gleaned, you too can mother another. Today we're going to be looking at an Old Testament mother-daughter combo and drawing our parallels from there, and that would be Naomi and Ruth from the book of Ruth. But I want to encourage you men, please don't tune me out, because there's actually a New Testament parallel that we can find in Paul and Timothy, with Paul saying that Timothy is like a son to him. Paul never married. Paul didn't have children, but he had Timothy, and Timothy was like a son. So even though my verbiage may lean female today, the applications can be made to both genders equally. So really, we're talking about mentorship. And I'll be honest with you, anytime that it was presented to me in my younger years, there was something in me that wanted it, but the way that it was constructed just never quite worked out for me. We would go to these women in ministries retreats, and I don't know if they put thought into who they put together or not, or if they literally just picked a name out of one bowl and a name out of the other bowl, and they're like, okay, here you go. And I was like, I don't know this woman. Can I trust her? Do I even want her influence in my life? Can I be vulnerable in front of her? I don't know. It just seemed a little forced. And yet, I know that there is biblical principle to mentoring. In fact, in Titus 2, verse 4, it even tells us that the older women are to teach or mentor the younger women. And it goes on and explains the various, loving your husband and being a godly wife and mother and those kinds of things. But so I knew that it had value. I just had never figured out or been in a situation until I invited Sandra to speak into my life. So again, we're in the book of Ruth today, and if you've never read the book of Ruth, highly encourage it. It's only 4 chapters, great little love story actually. But if you have read it and you're like, it's been a little while, let me bring you up to speed. There is this couple, Elimelech and Naomi, and they're living in Bethlehem. That rings a bell, right? We know what happened in Bethlehem. But this was about 1,100 years before the birth of Jesus. So they're living in Bethlehem with their 2 sons. A famine comes to Bethlehem, and they've got to go where the food is, right? So they pack up and they moved to a neighboring country called Moab. So they raise their boys there. Their boys grow up and they marry Moabite women. And then Elimelech dies, and Naomi finds herself a widow. But not just Elimelech, both of her boys die as well. And there she is in a foreign country, widowless, childless, all alone. And she's not just sad, she's bitter. In fact, she says, "Call me Mara, because I'm bitter." So let's pick it up in Ruth 1, verse 11. But Naomi said, speaking to her daughter-in-laws, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. And even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." So there's Naomi, totally alone and isolated, and just the way she wants it. She doesn't want her daughter-in-laws to go with her. She's returning to Bethlehem. The famine has lifted, and she is getting out of Moab, and she's doing it alone. She has no desire to mentor her daughter-in-laws. Have you ever been there? Maybe not in another country and returning home, but just gotten to the point that you're like, I'm empty and I have nothing to give. Why would you even want to be around me? I'm bitter. I know that I am. And I have nothing to offer you. So let's pick it up in verse 14. At this, they wept again. Then Orpah, not Oprah, Orpah, kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and to her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates me from you." This gal's determined. She is determined. And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. In a relationship, a friendship, can you give it up for my Vanna? I think it may have gotten a little, thank you. In a friendship, one person is going to pour into the other person's cup, and then it gets reciprocated. That's what friends do, right? They're there for each other. They're encouraging one another. They're there to celebrate one another. They mourn when the other one has had a loss. They celebrate when they've had a child or when they've gotten that job that they wanted. And that's a friendship. It's reciprocated. But in a mentoring relationship, we have an older one pouring into a younger one's life. We're going to pretend that this is the invitation. If the invitation is not issued, what happens is the older one goes to pour into the other one's cup. And what do we have? a big mess, and two very frustrated people. When we pour into someone's life that hasn't asked for it, it has another name. It's called meddling. That invitation has to be initiated. So if the invitation is initiated, the older one goes to pour into the younger one's life. And what do you have? A gal with a full cup and a lot more wisdom because somebody was willing to empty her cup into another. And honestly, the other lady is feeling pretty encouraged too, that she had something to give. So, younger gals, I want to speak to you for just a moment. One of the benefits of finding another mother is that we get to learn by example and not by experience. We learn by example and not from experience. Naomi had been the foreigner in Moab. She had to learn a whole new culture. She had to learn a whole new way of how to operate. And now the tables are turned, and Ruth is the foreigner in Israel. I would have to think that Naomi could help Ruth navigate those differences, and differences there were. They had totally different gods, totally different structures of systems and cultures. The opportunities to make mistake and mishandle the opportunities were abundant. I remember when our son was in first grade. His teacher called me when I was at work. That's rarely a good thing. You get that phone call at work, and he's like, Connor's okay, and Connor's a good kid, but there was an incident on the playground today, and Connor usually learns by example, but today he learned from experience. I have another friend that says, experience is what you get when you don't get what you want. Have you gotten some experience lessons in life before? Right? I know that I have. But how much farther could you go if you learned from somebody else's experience? Let's pretend for a moment we're going to rewind the clock by at least 10 years. Google Maps doesn't exist, and you have to operate off of a GPS. And the thing with GPS is you had to update them and load them with maps. How much farther could you be? How far could you go if your GPS was only loaded with your own maps? Nowhere new, that's for sure. Nowhere new. And you wouldn't need a GPS, would you? But when we are willing to let somebody else speak into our lives, we can learn from their experiences. We can also travel farther, faster. When Mark runs a marathon, Lord, I don't understand why, but when Mark runs a marathon, if he has a goal to run that marathon in 3 hours and 45 minutes, he's going to run behind a person who's carrying a stick that says 3 hours and 45 minutes. That person's called a pacer. This is exactly what Ruth had in Naomi. Naomi was her pacer. She's 50 yards further down this race called life than Ruth was. And so she could fall behind Naomi and learn from her. And in doing so, she gets to avoid some detours. She gets to have some wrong turns averted, and maybe even find a shortcut or two, because she's following somebody who's already navigated that path. But young gals, I want to ask you, what would keep you from wanting someone to speak into your life or to empty their cup into yours? I suggest it's probably one of three things. One, it could be pride. Well, I've got it all together. Why would I need someone to speak into my life? Or, I know I don't got it all together, but I don't want them to know that. Proverbs tells us that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. And I used to think that this was, okay, God's going to put obstacles or stones in our path that we're going to trip up on because he doesn't like pride in us. But I think it's our own pride that becomes those hurdles and those stones. That by not being willing to have people speak into our lives, being too proudful to allow them, we have to get all of our lessons by our own experiences instead of by someone else's. So we have an unteachable spirit, or we're unwilling to be transparent and vulnerable. The other reason might be lack of courage, and I have been there. I have so been there. We don't want to impose on somebody. They're so busy. They've got so much on their plate. Why would they make time for me? And so we say no for them by not even asking them. We may also fear rejection. Man, it's easier to try to do this on my own than to think that they wouldn't want to spend time with me, so I won't even ask. Or the third reason, we're unconvinced that it has worth, that spending time with an older person who can empty their cup into yours would actually be worthwhile. But let me ask you this. If you could ask someone who's a little further down the path questions like, I'm so overwhelmed, how do I get it all done? Or, how should I manage my resources? And don't think just money there. Or, what should I be prioritizing right now? Maybe that's in a question phrased like, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? Or, how do I love this man that God gave me, but he's just so opposite of me? Or maybe a question, would you like to have the answers to a question like, how do I navigate this diagnosis? Would those not be helpful answers that you could learn from someone who's already been down that path? And now to the older woman, the benefits of mothering another. First off, your wisdom is not wasted. Your wisdom's not wasted. Naomi had these cultural insights that had she kept them to herself, it would have been a detriment to both her and Ruth. And let me explain. In both Leviticus and Deuteronomy, the Lord tells the Israelites, when you plant your field and you go to harvest it, don't harvest 100% of it. You're to leave the perimeter unharvested, and then the widows and the foreigners can come by, and then they can gather. That was basically the Israeli welfare system. That's how they could provide for those who were less fortunate. But growing up in Moab, Ruth wouldn't have known this. Again, this was an edict from the Lord God, and they followed different gods in Moab. So Naomi was able to share with Ruth, I need you to go and collect the barley. The barley is ripe. I need you to go and collect it. And by her sharing her wisdom, she averted an early grave for the both of them. So unless Mark changes his name to Abraham, this Sarah is not going to be having any more babies. In fact, at 58, I am too old to enlist in any of the armed services, and I'm twice the age to compete in Miss America. Ageism, right? And sometimes we can begin to think that we are past our prime. But women, I want to encourage you. You aren't past your prime. Your wisdom is not past its prime. You are in your prime when it comes to wisdom. So we should share that wisdom. We should share that wisdom. So not only Ruth has gone out to glean in the fields. She happens to glean in the fields of a man named Boaz. And she's coming home at night, not with an apron full of barley. She's coming home with a basket full of barley. And Naomi's like, Ruth, where are you getting all of this? And she goes, well, I've been in Boaz's field, and he told me, make sure I just follow along right behind his harvesters. And he had instructed the harvesters, leave some extra for this girl. And Ruth may have not been picking up on all the nuances, so Naomi's like, girl, he's flirting with ya. But she had that wisdom to share. She knew what that was supposed to, the harvest that she should have been expecting, and yet she's coming home with so much more. So we get to the end of this sweet little love story. We're in chapter 4. Ruth has gone on to marry Boaz, and then they go on to have a baby boy. And I want you to look at what happens in this chapter, because what happens is not Ruth, but Naomi is celebrated, and her purpose and energy are restored. And you too can have restored purpose and energy. So Ruth, chapter 4, picking it up in verse 14. Then the women of the town said to Naomi, praise the Lord who has now provided a redeemer for your family. May this child be famous in all of Israel. May he restore your youth and care for you in your old age. For he is the son of your daughter-in-law, who loves you and has been better to you than 7 sons. Naomi took the baby and cuddled him to her breast, and she cared for him as if it were her own. And the neighbor women said, now at last, Naomi, not Ruth, Naomi has a son again. Remember, she's childless. But now they are celebrating her. And they named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. See, Ruth's win was Naomi's win as well. And when we are willing to mother another, we get that restored youth, that restored purpose, and we get to celebrate wins through another person. So as your nest empties, women, your cup is still full. It's full of experience, it's full of wisdom, it's full of insights. And God wants to birth new purpose through you. And you might be saying, Sarah, that's cool, but how does that actually really play out? Again, I've been in that situation. How does that mentoring actually happen? Well, I've got to encourage you to discover another. You've got to discover another. So younger women, I want you to look around. Expand your circle. Don't be staying just with those who are like-minded with you, but expand your circle. Consider someone maybe that you've admired from afar, but you've never really gotten to know. And then put yourself in a place where you can discover another, like Rooted and Refreshed or the Family Fest that we have coming up. Make sure you're involved in things where you can discover other people. Lay down your pride, build up your courage, and extend the invitation. When I was in college, I had a great college roommate. Loved her, loved spending time with her. She was everything I wasn't. She was really outgoing and she was fun. But there was one thing Diana, besides bowling, that Diana could not do, and that was to pick up the phone and order a pizza. She probably is loving that you can do that on an app now. But for whatever reason, that would paralyze her. And she really kind of needed a script. Maybe you're in that same boat. So I'm going to offer a script to you today, and I'm going to fill in the needs that I would have had with Sandra. Sandra, I really admire how you and Bob co-pastor together. Could I take you for coffee and ask you some questions about how I could grow in this area? It doesn't have to be complicated. You may have to learn their name first, but it doesn't have to be complicated. And to the older women, I want to encourage you. Be approachable. Be approachable. When it's greeting time, stay standing. Get out of your pew. Get out of your row and go introduce yourself to someone that's 30 years younger than yourself. Be approachable. And then I want you to remember back to when you were younger. When you were 13, 14 years old, you didn't even, hormones are shifting and you weren't even comfortable in your own skin. That's one benefit we have of getting older. We get comfortable in our own skin, don't we, women? So remember back to what it's like to be a preteen and it's difficult to approach someone. Would you go up and introduce yourself? You're still not doing the asking. That ask has to come from the younger woman, or it is meddling. It's meddling. But if you will be so brave to at least introduce yourself, it will open up the opportunity for that younger one. So my invite today is to only the older women. If you would be willing and open to an invitation to coffee, to smoothies, to McDonald's for a Coke, if you would be open to an invitation and you're willing to empty your cup into another and refrain when not asked, would you be willing to stand today? If you're willing to have someone come up to you and say, I see things in you, and I would love a little bit of time with you, would you stand? Annie, thank you for standing. Okay. Sorry, lights are bright. I see Inez up there. I can't always make out faces in the lights, but thank you. Young ladies, I want you to look around. You are surrounded by wisdom that is willing to pour into you, to fill your empty cup and not ask anything else of you. If you will just be brave enough, muster the courage, break down the fear, break down the pride, and ask another to be your mother.